threat, opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello. I used to be John Cleese, and I'm going to be doing some shows for GB News for two reasons. One, they asked me to, and two, they want programming for viewers who are completely out of touch, a much neglected demographic. So stay out of touch with me.
As a warm-up for your show, you could do worse than comic genius John Cleese, who joins the channel shortly. On Mark Dolan Tonight, in my big opinion, my verdict on the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after 100 days in office. And after 10, my Mark Meets guest is Conservative MP Danny Krueger, MBE, son of Prue Leith, former Boris Johnson aide and chief speechwriter for David Cameron. In the big question, has Labour changed under Sir Keir Starmer? And in the news agenda with my panel, should Boris Johnson replace Nadhim Zahawi as Conservative Party chairman? Also, do we demonise dieting? And is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner? A busy 2 hours to come, lots of topics, and my big opinion monologue, my verdict on Rishi Sunak after 100 days. But first, Ray Addison with the headlines.
Thanks, Mark. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Labour Party says Rishi Sunak still has questions to answer following his sacking of Nadhim Zahawi. The Prime Minister made the decision after an ethics inquiry found the party chairman had committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. Mr Zahawi has been facing questions over his tax affairs after he admitted paying a penalty to HMRC for an error. Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, says she's written to Rishi.
What did he know and when about that enormous settlement that Nadhim Zahawi was negotiating with HMRC and the huge penalty that he had to pay? Why did Rishi Sunak say in Parliament that all questions had been answered about this affair? And why on earth is the Prime Minister holding up this rogues gallery of Conservative ministers with others who obviously have broken security rules, who are subject to allegations of very serious bullying, and yet the Prime Minister seems too weak to act against them?
No newly convicted transgender person with a history of violence against women will be placed in female prisons in Scotland. The temporary measure aims to ensure the safety of inmates while the management of trans prisoners is examined. The decision comes ahead of an urgent review into lessons learned by the case of convicted double rapist Isla Bryson, who was originally sent to a women's prison. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a teenage girl in Hexham. 15-year-old Holly Newton was stabbed in the Priestpopple area of the town on Friday. She died in hospital. A 16-year-old boy was also injured. The accused, who can't be named for legal reasons, has also been charged with attempted murder. The government will publish an urgent emergency care plan tomorrow to try to tackle pressures on the NHS. It comes as the Health Department announced plans to build virtual beds caring for tens of thousands of elderly and vulnerable people in their own homes. The Health Secretary says shifting care away from hospitals will reduce waiting times. However, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is accusing the government of sticking plaster politics.
It seems we've gone from 40 new hospitals to hospitals at home. I think a lot of people will say, well, how will I be able to be treated in my own home if the government's half the number of district nurses who are essential to provide support in the community? I think this is a government that's run out of steam, run out of ideas, and isn't able to deal with the fundamental problems of the NHS, and so they're resorting to sticking plasters.
And finally, members of Britain's Hindu and Indian communities have been protesting at BBC buildings across the country over a documentary on Narendra Modi. Well, people gathered in London, Newcastle and Birmingham in response to the programme, which examines claims over the Indian Prime Minister's role in riots in 2002, in which thousands of Muslims died. The protesters are calling for a boycott of the BBC and for it to be defunded. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is the People's Channel, GB News. Back now to Mark Dolan.
My thanks to Ray Addison, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. In my big opinion, in just a moment, my verdict on the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after 100 days in office. In the big question, has Labour changed under Sir Keir Starmer? Would you vote for them? And after 10, my Mark Meets guest is Conservative MP Danny Krueger, MBE, son of Prue Leith, former Boris Johnson aide and chief speechwriter for David Cameron. In the news agenda with my panel, should Boris Johnson replace Nadeem Zahawi as Conservative Party chairman? Also, do we demonise dieting? And is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner? Reacting to those stories and many more are my special panel tonight. Brand new to Mark Dolan Tonight, former MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, TV and radio presenter Neil Fox, and journalist and political commentator Emma Burnell. Now, I want to hear from you throughout the show, mark@gbnews.uk. This programme has a golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. So there you go. Lots to get through. Big opinions, big stories, big guests. Let's start with this. By firing Tory party chairman Nadeem Zahawi, Rishi Sunak may just have fired up his premiership. And whilst I acknowledge he hasn't set the world on fire since his arrival at number 10, it's my view that shares in Rishi Sunak are too low. As he marks 100 days in office this week, which is a long time in the job by recent standards, it's all to play for. A week is a long time in politics, and 2 years, which is how long he's got until the next election, is an eternity. The firing of Zahawi is what we need to see more of from Sunak, his ruthless side, as he pursues his 5-point plan to halve inflation, cut the debt, fix the NHS waiting lists, boost economic growth and tackle the migrant crisis. Now, the Tories, not for the first time in their history, are dogged by allegations of sleaze, which may or may not have merit. But however unedifying these stories about financial impropriety may be, they are ultimately little more than plot lines in the Westminster soap opera. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would humbly suggest what matters more to you, the British people, is the value of the pound in your pocket, how much your rent costs or your mortgage, energy bills, your job security, the safety of the streets, your ability to get a GP appointment, good schools for your kids, and so on. With the cervix-free leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, ahead in the polls, I would say be careful what you wish for. Yes, he is a million times better than Jeremy Corbyn, and many would argue Labour deserve a shot at power after 13 years of Tory misrule. Commentators say that Starmer has transformed his party, ridding them of the scourge of anti-Semitism and dragging them kicking and screaming into the political centre ground, a la Tony Blair. Starmer is talking about bold NHS reform, stopping the boats and fixing the economy. He even likes Brexit now. They say that Starmer couldn't do any worse than the Tories, who crashed the economy. As a result, many think it's time for Labour. Really? Is Labour the answer to industrial strife and the striking unions when they're in the pocket of the union barons themselves? Let me tell you, it's very hard to stand up to organisations upon whom you are financially dependent. Is Labour really the answer to the migrant crisis when they've blocked the Rwanda plan and promised a deal with France? Good luck with that one. Bon chance. Are Labour really the answer when it comes to woke political correctness, which is driving so many Brits mad? Jeremy Clarkson's been writing about it. He points out quite correctly in the Sunday Times last weekend that woke culture is slowly eating away at the fabric of this country, teaching us to hate our history and divide our society with bonkers ideas like critical race theory, which links racism to skin colour, and gender ideology, which says a man is a woman and vice versa. How can Starmer push back on that when he can't even define what a woman is, even though he's married to one? Starmer is on record as saying, and I quote, "The phrase only women have a cervix is something that shouldn't be said. It's not right." And he'll tackle extreme political correctness and woke nonsense, will he? For the record, only women have a cervix. I should know. I spent 9 months next to one as I grew inside my mother's womb. Only women have a womb as well, by the way. Is Labour really the answer to inflation when they'll be under enormous pressure to hand out bonanza public sector pay rises, given that that's where their support lies politically? Is Labour really the answer to our energy problems when they want to start a 1970s-style state-run energy firm which invests taxpayers' borrowed billions on flaky renewables? Now, green energy could be the future, but should taxpayers be taking that bet? In the end, Sunak has settled the nerves of the international bond markets, upon whom we are unfortunately now reliant, with the cost of government borrowing having fallen and with trust in Britain as an investment having significantly recovered internationally. Yes, taxes are too high. Illegal immigration is too high. Inflation is too high. Waiting lists are too high, enough to make you sick. But in his next 100 days, there's every chance that Sunak, if he stays focused and keeps his eye on the prize, could make significant progress in all those areas. And if he does so, I believe he narrows the gap on Starmer and flirts with a narrow victory at the next election. In the end, it's a choice between two prime ministers. Rishi Sunak or Sir Keir Starmer? Who would you rather have at number 10? Look, Sunak lacks Boris Johnson's speech-making skills and charisma. Those Instagram videos he does are about as wooden as the New Forest. And he's hardly man of the people, an out-of-touch, privately educated rich banker who's married to a billionaire. But who cares? You don't have to go for a pint with him or be his best mate. He doesn't have to say all the right things. Sunak doesn't have to be a great person. He has to be a great Prime Minister. And it's my view that after a solid 100 days in office, he's got the makings of just that. His first 100 days won't be his last. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.uk. Are shares in Rishi Sunak too low? He celebrates 100 days in office this week. What's your appraisal? I'll get to your email shortly, but let's get the views now of my fantastic panel. Brand new, a fantastic new recruit to Mark Dolan tonight. Former MEP and political commentator Annunziata Rees-Mogg. TV and radio presenter, a broadcasting legend, Neil Fox. And journalist and political commentator and playwright Emma Burnell. Annunziata, let me start with you. Your appraisal of Rishi Sunak's first 100 days.
I think we have to face the obvious fact that he came in at a very, very difficult point, not only in his country's future, but his party's future. And so far, he has done nothing to make that any worse. So that in itself is an achievement that it wasn't always certain he would get to. However, I think there have been errors along the way, and I'm hopeful that he will sort those out, get rid of the problems that he's had, such as having Nadeem Zahawi being investigated and accused of breaking the ministerial code. But now he's cleared that out, let's hope he can get on and sort out the real problems our country faces.
Annunziata, should he have sacked Nadeem Zahawi sooner than he did?
I wasn't inside his head and his thinking process. I think we were all pretty certain a week ago of where this was going. But if you've got a due process, it's wise to stick to it.
Interesting stuff. Neil Fox, what do you think about this? 100 days of Rishi Sunak. I believe shares in Sunak are too low.
Yeah, I have to say I was nodding along to your monologue, Mark.
Not falling asleep, I hope.
No, nodding in agreement, you'll be pleased to know, because I think you made a lot of really good points. Look, I think he's done a pretty good job. He came in at a really tough time. I mean, last year was insane, wasn't it? Let's be honest. And he had to steady a very unstable ship, and I think he's done that pretty well. And I remember being on this programme some months ago when the leadership election was going on, and just saying, actually, do you know what? I don't want necessarily the most charismatic man, the best person to make videos or make funny one-liners. All I just want is actually someone potentially quite boring and dull, just to be really good at their job, just to steady things down, because there are an awful lot of really big issues facing our country at the moment. Some maybe the government's making, some other ones that have been internationally made, but you just need a steady ship, really. And I think the first 100 days have been pretty steady. They have been quite wooden in places. I did smile at the New Forest mention there. I thought I was very good. But again, he is pretty steady and stable. Obviously, Mr. Zahawi, this sacking probably has been right, but I agree that there is a due process. And instead of knee-jerking all the time and instantly sacking people, you have to actually work through and work out whether anything has been done wrong. They've worked out yes. So he had to go, and now he's made the decision, and now we have to move on. Do I think it should be Boris Johnson? Please no, because I think, although that sounds like in a way an easy fix and a charismatic one, I don't think that would be right for the country or the party, but I'm sure we'll discuss that more later on. But so far, I think a pretty solid 100 days, but there's so much work to do. These 5 points they want to fix, they all need fixing.
Emma Burnell, the inconvenient truth for Labour is that Rishi Sunak is doing a solid job.
I mean, he's solidly 20 points behind. It doesn't feel that inconvenient. He's better than Liz Truss. Great. I think, honestly, you've made the best fist of making a case for Rishi Sunak, and I applaud you for that, Mark. I really, really do. But I think that you know in your heart that the country wants to change. And I think Rishi Sunak knows that in his heart too. There are just times when the political wind changes and it just feels like this government is clapped out. They haven't actually done anything in those 100 days. The 100 days has been, first of all, tidying up the absolute disaster that was left behind from the previous two Tory Prime Ministers. But in the meantime, there's been no new legislation. And it's not like we're a country that isn't going, we need stuff to happen. We need things to change. So there needs to be so much more dynamism. And I just don't think either he has that in him or that the party is behind him in being willing to come together and make the changes that they would want to see.
Annunziata, the clock's against us, but you're pretty close to some important figures in the Conservative Party. Do you feel that as a political force, they are running out of steam? Are they tired? Do they need a break from power?
No, I think there was a definite exhaustion after COVID. It was an extraordinary time in our country and in the world, and an awful lot of energy and effort went into that. But they've regrouped, they've got together and are supporting Rishi, that they actually seem pretty united in a way that, although he had his huge fans, they weren't necessarily behind Boris Johnson, as was seen at his downfall. But I think pulling together and finding a way forward to solve the really serious problems our country's facing economically and socially will see them through.
OK, well, look, coming up in the news agenda with my panel, should Boris Johnson replace Nadeem Zahawi as Conservative Party chairman? My Mark Meets guest is Tory MP Danny Krueger. Well done to producer Holly for booking Danny at the very last minute. And what a booking. This guy is a former aide to Boris Johnson, chief speechwriter for David Cameron, and quite the life story. By the way, one other little thing. His mum is Prue Leith from The Bake Off, so I'll be asking him how delicious his childhood was. But next in the big question, has Labour changed under Keir Starmer? I'll be asking ex-Labour Minister Dennis McShane and Tory firebrand Anne Widdecombe. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236 and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, I believe that shares in Keir Starmer are too low. I think he's undervalued, and I think he has a narrow chance of winning the next election. There you go, I said it. A week is a long time in politics. 2 years is an eternity. But what do you think? Mark at gbnews.uk. Trevor's not having it. Trevor says, hi, Mark, I've always voted Conservative, but what can they do in the next 15 months that they haven't done in the last 12 years? They're finished, and I'm voting Reform next time. Martin says, too steady and stable to win the next election. Unless he pulls a rabbit out of a money tree, the Conservatives are toast. High taxes, illegal immigration and no plan for growth. They are finished. Bad news for Sunak and the Tories. Let's have a look at this one from Sarah. Hi, Sarah. How are you? Thanks for your email tonight. Anyone who has shares in Sunak should ditch them. Let's not forget who was responsible for getting the economy in the mess it's in. Yes, Sunak. In his leadership, which he lost, in case you'd forgotten, he promised to stop the boats in 100 days. He has failed. So there we go. Sarah's email goes on. It's fascinating, and thank you for it, Sarah. I wish I had time for more. Last but not least, Richard. Rishi is super intelligent with an immense work ethic. I'm no fan. I didn't want him, but I think he needs to be given more time to see if he is hot air or the real deal. Thank you, Richard. Keep those emails coming. Mark at gbnews.uk. But time waits for no man, and time certainly doesn't wait for Anne Widdecombe. Let's do this. Yes, it's time for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. Tonight, addressing Labour's London Regional Conference, Sir Keir Starmer outlined how he has transformed his own party.
Never again will Labour fail to grasp that economic stability is the foundation of our ambitions. Never again will Labour allow hate to spread unchallenged. We've changed our party and we're ready to change Britain.
So that's tonight's big question. Has Labour changed under Sir Keir Starmer? Would they change Britain for the better? Has he reinvented his party in the way that Tony Blair did in the 1990s? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome former Conservative Government Minister, best-selling author and television personality Anne Widdecombe, and former Labour Minister for Europe and political commentator Denis McShane. Hi, Denis. Welcome back to the show. Has Labour changed under Keir Starmer?
Wow, yes. I mean, if you actually read the Labour blogs, the poor left wing, my old mates, are tearing their hair out. They have finally been told this country is not up for a radical left, very socialist programme, and we've got perfectly competent leader, not dramatic, no drama Starmer, who'll just set in hand cleaning up a lot of the self-evident mistakes. I mean, culminating today, this ludicrous business. I mean, Anne, you're in government, I was in government. The idea that some advisor of the government has to rush in his report at midnight, type it out double quick, and then the Prime Minister uses it to fire a man he expressed full confidence in. I mean, it's just never been seen before in British politics. I mean, the Tories, frankly, are in a pretty bad way at the moment.
However, Denis, focusing on Labour for the moment, does Keir Starmer have the X factor? Does he have Tony Blair's charisma?
He's not a superstar in the sense that Tony Blair became. I mean, to begin with, Tony Blair was described as Bambi by the Tories. Many on the left of the Labour Party didn't really rate him. But he's just calmly explained what he thought needed to be done, and his explanation was accepted by the country. And in a very different way, if you like, a bit like Joe Biden in the United States, steady and sure, we're past the Flash Harry moment in politics, the Berlusconis, the Boris Johnsons, the sort of drama queens and drama kings, and people just want competent, steady management taking decisions, in the broad best interests of the country.
Joe Biden, steady and safe. Pull the other one.
Oh, on the contrary. I mean, on the very contrary, Mark. I know Anne's laughing away. I mean, it's a Daily Telegraph on speed. The plain fact is that Biden unbelievably kept control of the Senate, which no other president's done mid-term. He's got very low unemployment, better growth. He's got some stuff that a lot of people don't like. It's called the Industrial Relations Reform Act. He's facing down Putin. If I had a penny or two, I would put it on Biden winning or holding the White House at the next US presidential election. Just wait and see.
Well, I suppose pigs might fly. Denis, you're entitled to your view, but Anne, let's focus on Labour. I think Denis reveals a lot in his answers. He's not that keen to talk about Labour, and that wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement of the leader, was it?
No, and I mean, any comparison with Biden is farcical. I mean, Biden is senile. And the idea that he's going to win his next election, I think, is far-fetched. However, let's concentrate on this country. Let's concentrate on Starmer. First of all, he is in hock to the unions, and he hasn't said anything about how he's going to cope with strikes. Secondly, he has got no clear policy at all on immigration, which is now, on illegal immigration, which is now a serious concern for pretty well everybody in the country. He's got no policies for getting rid of woke and getting the country back to common sense. In fact, he's adding to woke. He doesn't apparently know what a woman is, can't define a woman. And as I always point out, although I'm aware that a lot of people have lost sight of this, it was he who, when he was running the Crown Prosecution Service, began the measures, which Alison Saunders then took on, but began the measures which led to so many false allegations against men, because the victim had always to be believed. And indeed, that initial movement on the part of Starmer was what eventually led to farces like Operation Midland. And I know people tend to forget that. I remember it. And finally, this. What have we heard from him this week? At a time when the NHS is in crisis, there are strikes all over the public sector, we have a war on in Ukraine, and all he could talk about from the dispatch box was the politics of personal destruction. In this case, it was Nadeem Sadawi. Now, I believe that whatever else Rishi Sunak is right or wrong about, he is right to say innocent until proven guilty, not going to take measures while there is an investigation going on, make that investigation very quick, and then take decisive action when you've got the results. Can't see anything wrong with that. But Starmer already at the dispatch box wanted to brush aside any presumption of innocence, any need for a proper investigation, and just to go in like a bull in a china shop.
Dennis, perhaps Anne is so effusive, perhaps she's sweating because she knows deep down that Starmer will be our next Prime Minister. But how would you respond to what Anne has said about Keir Starmer?
Well, it's a lot of froth, isn't it? There's nothing concrete or substantial there. What Starmer's done, and I'm not necessarily his biggest fan. Oh, Anne, I didn't interrupt you. Please, we used to be courteous. You were courteous when you were in the House of Commons. Try it again. You'll enjoy life a lot more. Now, Keir is modernising, recentering, getting rid of a lot of the old barnacles that have been clinging to Labour for far too long, certainly in between after 2010 and up to 2020. And I think the people probably are liking what they are seeing. I mean, all the opinion polls suggest that. We haven't had any by-elections to actually test it. And so I think, time for a change. It's how our democracy works. I mean, the Whigs didn't stay in power forever. Liberals didn't stay in power. Conservatives didn't stay in power forever. Tories have been in power now for 13 years. It's ended in farce in the small hours of this morning, frankly. Now, I don't blame Rishi Sunak in the way that some venomous Tories do. His real enemies are on the right, Mark. They're on GBNews. They're not in the Labour Party. We rather like him as Prime Minister. Let him stay there. It's just his sheer inexperience, his lack of political nous, his lack of a political nose, a smell. You said he'll go out for a drink with people. Well, he doesn't drink. He doesn't really go out with people. And when he does meet them, as we see in some of these staged stunt events, he seems very, very uncomfortable. He's a magnificent Goldman Sachs banker, hedge fund manager, multi-billionaire, as you said, without the faintest idea of the life of the vast majority of middle class and other people in this country. So if he stays on as PM, and who knows, I mean, maybe Boris will try and oust him again, because he's got the loyalty of a sort of ferret on heat, old Boris, hasn't he? Then I think if he stays on, I'm afraid probably he's not going to be the Prime Minister in 18 months or 20 months' time.
Anne, I've just got a couple of seconds left. Closing thoughts.
Well, absolutely wonderful, isn't it? I mean, Starmer is praised for being like the senile old man in the White House, and the Prime Minister is criticised because he doesn't drink. Never heard a politician before criticised because he doesn't drink. I've surefire heard the opposite sometimes.
And on that alcoholic note, my sincere thanks to Anne Widdecombe, former government minister, best-selling author and television personality. Anne is with us every Sunday night. She is the star of Mark Dolan tonight, and always a highlight on a Sunday. And what a delight to welcome the former Labour Minister for Europe and political commentator, Dennis McShane. Dennis, I look forward to our next on-air encounter. Thanks for your time. Your reaction, folks, mark at gbnews.uk. Coming up, my Mark Meets guest is Tory MP Danny Krueger, former aide to Boris Johnson, chief speechwriter for David Cameron, and the son of that fabulous chef and entrepreneur and restaurateur Prue Leith from the Bake Off. Don't worry, we won't spend too much time talking about his mum, but I would imagine he had a delicious childhood. We've got the papers at 10:30 with full panel reaction. And we're asking, is this the end of Nicola Sturgeon's career? Has her woke trans madness blown up in her face? But next, should Boris Johnson replace Nadhim Zahawi as Tory party chairman? We'll discuss that next.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on.
Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it.
Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now we're reacting to the big stories of the day. My all-star panel, brand new to Mark Dolan tonight, former MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, TV and radio presenter Neil Fox, and journalist and political commentator Emma Burnell. Now, the Conservative MP and soon-to-be GB News star Jacob Rees-Mogg has responded to the news of Nadhim Zahawi's sacking by suggesting Boris Johnson would be the perfect replacement as Conservative Party chairman. Here he is talking to our very own Camilla Tominey this morning.
I think it's very difficult to bring back Boris Johnson in a subordinate role, that he's such a big figure that he would dominate any cabinet that he was in, even as a less senior figure than Prime Minister. So I think that would be very hard to do. But he has all the right attributes for a party chairman.
So, should Boris Johnson stage a political comeback as the new chairman of the Tory party? Would he be Rishi Sunak's secret weapon or a thorn in his side? Neil?
I think ultimately he'd be a big thorn in his side because, as quite rightly was said there, he's a huge figure in politics still.
Right.
A bit Marmite, we were discussing amongst the three of us. So you do love him or you hate him. And he does seem to connect very well. He's an orator, communicator. You know, we know he can connect well with people. And would he be happy just to be the chairman? Or is he sitting there all the time just thinking, I actually want to be back in number 10? And I think that would be the problem, because you always have to remember the reason why he ended up not being Prime Minister. We have such short memories. But the amount of sleaze and problems and cock-ups that happened in those years before, leading up to when he left, you know, they haven't gone away and they haven't changed. So those are all there to be brought back and used against him and actually against the party. And I don't know whether maybe we just need something fresh and new. I don't know what fresh and new is in this department, but I don't necessarily think it's the right move.
Emma, you're something of a student of human nature. You're a playwright, very perceptive. And this would be an extraordinary drama, wouldn't it? Having Boris Johnson as chairman of the party and Rishi Sunak as leader.
It really would. I mean, as a Labour supporter, I couldn't welcome it enough. Let's look at what the job of Conservative chair is to do. A, it's to be the person who goes on the media round and defends the government on the story of the day. Now, the thing about Boris is he's always the story of the day. He will be, you know, throughout this time, we have not seen, you know, we've only just seen the dates set for the investigation around Partygate and all of that. So that's all yet to come. He's still tainting everything that he's ever touched. A part of the story last week, the secondary story from Nadeem Zahawi was this loan that it was organised through the chair of the BBC. To Boris Johnson, because for some reason he didn't have quite enough money and needed 800 grand more. So it just every time. So that would be, every time he's on there, he wouldn't be able to defend the government. He would be talking about Boris Johnson and he wouldn't be able to help himself. Secondly, their job is to organise the party and get them onto an election footing. Now, Boris Johnson is a man who had to go through 3 number 10s in his short time in power because he just couldn't get that personnel management bit right. So he's not the guy that's going to go into the Conservative HQ and sit down and roll his sleeves up and sort out that who can do these jobs well rather than who's going to be good for Boris. So again, I just don't see him taking that role on well for the Tories, so please let him do it.
Annunziata, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think it's a dilemma for Sunak, because if Sunak, at a certain point, becomes convinced that he will lose the next election, Boris Johnson becomes the kitchen sink option.
I don't think he does, because I think he would actually garner huge support around the country. That the members who left in droves over the last 12 months would return, that he would bring in money, he would bring in membership, he would bring in door knockers and leaflet deliverers, and it would go down extremely well with Conservative supporters in the seats that it looks like Sunak is set to lose. However, I think setting up a massive division between the Prime Minister and his party outside of Parliament would be a big mistake. And whether it was intentional or not, that division would exist.
Do you think the party is having trouble moving on from Boris Johnson? Are they sort of deifying the man now? And is he the new issue that splits the party? Because previously it was Europe, wasn't it? Now it feels like it's Boris that splits the party. Has he filled that gap?
Everyone needs to disagree about something. I think Boris Johnson is Marmite, as Neil said, but...
Or peanut butter, maybe?
I don't like either.
All right. Stilton cheese, but yeah, I get your point.
He does have a very, very strong group of core supporters. That's why he got the landslide election victory he did in 2019, and it would be an error to forget that. However, I think he is quite happy now making proper money. I suspect his wife is also appreciating not having to live completely in the public eye and ditto their children. It is not a great lifestyle, however nice number 10 might look on paper, or however many beautiful sofas and wallpapers you have. But he does have a group of supporters that could change the outcome of the election for the Conservatives. I think Rishi Sunak wants to have him on side, but he doesn't want to set him up with a platform of his own to potentially undermine, whether on purpose or not, Rishi's leadership.
Johnson is, however, a resource, and the Tories are behind in the polls. So if you're Rishi Sunak and you're sat there in number 10, drinking from your 100 quid thermos mug, gifted to you by your billionaire wife, in your posh moccasins, not that I'm jealous, what does he do with Boris? Well, you know, how does he deploy this resource? After all, Boris Johnson is a Conservative.
He is a Conservative, and that is why he does have support up and down the country and why he won an election in the way that he did. Rishi Sunak has to offer some kind of olive branch, and they need to get on for the sake of the party and for the country.
What sort of job would suit Boris then? I mean, I guess Deputy Prime Minister would be a stretch.
I think it's unlikely.
Foreign Secretary? Send him abroad again?
I think it's unlikely to be an actual job. I think let him get on with it, but show that you can be friends for the good of the country, the good of the party.
Yeah, I think one of the problems is that Boris is such a big figure that you are absolutely right, Emma, that whenever Boris would get in front of a camera, he would kind of dominate it, and it'd all be about Boris, and actually about Boris's history and what he's about and what is he going to do in the future, and it won't be about the issues that he should be talking about, maybe the party and whatever they're trying to defend that day, or maybe what their policy should be. And I think that's the problem. He's almost too big. He's like a one-man sort of roller. Well, I was going to say, a one-man sort of caterpillar tractor. He just blasts his way through.
Now, Emma, I'm not sure I buy your idea that you'd love Boris Johnson back in public life, because the bottom line is he's very popular, especially among those red wall Labour voters.
He was popular with some of those voters, but there are some real things that were missed in terms of what happened in that election. First of all, Labour gifted the Boris Johnson led Conservative Party an absolute own goal in the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, and B, the disastrous approach that leadership took to 2019, and the difference between the way that Labour approached 2017 and 2019 was sort of monumental.
Predominantly Brexit.
The
second referendum.
But also, just by that point, the issues internally in the party had gone from behind the scenes to spilling out massively into the public, and things like the things around anti-Semitism, they were really big issues that needed to be dealt with and weren't. So that gave Boris a much easier ride. Also, Boris Johnson is really incredibly popular with one group of voters. He's also equally incredibly loathed by almost as large a separate group of voters. And there are very few people who can be won over either way in the middle.
Yeah.
So, actually, he's not a persuasive politician. He's a popular politician that expands his own voter base, but he's not someone who brings over wavering voters, and I think that's what the Tories need right now.
Well, look, fascinating debate. What's your view? I'll get to your emails next on that. Mark at gbnews.uk. Do you think that Boris Johnson would be a good party chairman? Let me know your thoughts. Now, we've been asking you on Twitter your view on this. Should Boris make a comeback as Tory party chairman? 52% said yes and 48% said no. The irony is deafening. What about a second vote? Shall we go again to the public on that one? I will accept the result, fear not. There you go. More than half of you want Boris back, at least in a big job in politics, if not number 10. Coming up in next hour, very looking forward to my take at 10. Big changes and efficiencies are planned for the NHS. About bloody time. And my Mark Meets guest is Tory MP Danny Krueger. Not only is he Prue Leith's son, of course, that woman, the wonderful baker from Bake Off, but he holds an MBE and, in fact, is one of the most important Tory insiders you will find. Former speech writer to David Cameron, former top aide to Boris Johnson. He's at 10. But next, speaking of top politicians, is Nicola Sturgeon's political career and her dream of independence over? We'll discuss that with the SNP next.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Now, I'll get to your emails very shortly. I wouldn't normally indulge to this extent, but my big opinion monologue is now on Twitter, courtesy of our fabulous Carl Bennett in the digital team. I believe he's the digital deputy president right now and enjoyed a recent pay rise. And I want to thank him for putting that video up because it's going viral already. In this big opinion monologue, I talked about Keir Starmer and I said that only women have a cervix. And my proof of that is that I spent 9 months next to one as I grew inside the womb of my own mother. OK, well, let me tell you that my mother has emailed the show. Right? She's emailed mark@gbnews.uk. You know me, I wouldn't normally be this indulgent, but I think it's in the national interest. And my mother has said, "Oh, Mark, I wish I could have those times back. You killed me towards the end of the pregnancy. You had a big head jammed in my pelvis." And then she said she's enjoying the panel. Well, thanks, Mum, and thanks for putting me on this planet. There you go. Everyone gets a bit of freedom of speech on GB News, including Mrs. Dolan. A couple of emails. Chairman of the Tories. Hi, Mark. Boris should not become chairman. Ask Annunziata to persuade Jacob to go for the job. I've had a couple of emails saying it should be Jacob Rees-Mogg, in fact. However, Patrick says, Mark, I've just polled all of the pro-Tory groups that I'm a member of, and there seems to be a significant majority in favour of Boris becoming chair. But I doubt Boris would take it on whilst Rishi is in charge. Get Penny Mordaunt into number 10, and then things might really take off. I'll get to more of your emails shortly, mark@gbnews.uk. But let's head now to issues north of the border. As you'll have heard in the news headlines, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has had to row back on her plans to accommodate trans women rapists in Scottish prisons. Following public anger around the case of Adam Graham, who raped 2 women as a man, but who then chose to identify as female and who qualified for a place in a women's prison, even though he is still a biological man. Nicola Sturgeon has committed huge political capital to her new gender ID law, in which people can unilaterally change their gender by which they identify without a medical examination and after just a few months. Many women feel this new law will impact women's safety and female-only spaces. So, has Nicola Sturgeon bitten off more than she can chew? Is this the end of her political career and the dream of independence? By cancelling women, has Sturgeon cancelled herself? Let's now speak to a good friend of the show, former SNP Glasgow City Councillor Austin Sheridan. Hi, Austin. Great to have you back on the programme. Is it game over for Sturgeon and for independence?
Absolutely not. But there's one thing that I would just like to correct just in your opening there, is that Nicola Sturgeon has never planned to have rapists and female judges. I don't think any politician of any political complexion, would want that to be the case. What we did see was the Scottish Prison Service carry out their review, and we've seen them come to a conclusion, the correct conclusion, that a rapist should never be allowed to serve in a female prison alongside other females. Personally, I believe it was a mistake in the first place for that person to be placed in a female prison, Cottonvale in Scotland. They are going to be doing a review of how that came about, and I would certainly expect the outcome of that review should mean that that situation should never arise again. Women were concerned, women had a right to be concerned, and I was concerned as well when I seen this. I don't think anyone in the wouldn't be. So absolutely, I'm glad there's a review taking place, and I hope the outcome of that will be that situation should never arise again.
However, and I take your point, Austin, if trans women rapists are not accommodated in female prisons, that is the Scottish Government saying they're not women. Can we confirm that? They're not women because they don't go to a women's prison?
Well, the way that I would view it is if you commit a crime as a man, such as rape, sexual assault, then that is the way that crime should be punished. That's the way it should be treated. I think that would be fairly reasonable to have, and for those to proceed. In terms of how these prisoners, are managed when they first enter the prison service, it should be noted that this person was isolated in isolation. They had no access to any other prisoners. Any prisoners that are sent to prison for crimes such as rape or sexual assault, they are always isolated until a risk assessment is carried out. The risk assessment takes into account 3 main points: the risk to that prisoner, the risk to other prisoners, and the risk to prison staff. The Scottish Prison Service are very good at generally carrying out these assessments, and more often than not come to the correct conclusion.
We also are hearing stories of a sex attacker that's accommodated in a women's prison that identifies as a baby and wears a nappy. Nicola Sturgeon's lost control of the country, hasn't she?
Well, that's not something that I am aware of, and I'm not entirely sure how someone could get nappies into female jails in order, or any prison actually, in order to carry that kind of thing out. As I say, that's not something that I would, but absolutely not. Nicola Sturgeon has not lost control of the country. Nicola Sturgeon, as I say, has put faith in the Scottish Prison Service. I had faith in the Scottish Prison Service they would come to the right conclusion over the vile rapist that was sent to prison, and absolutely the right outcome of that was they should never be allowed, to mix with the female population. Because one of the things we have to understand is in female prisons is that a lot of women who are in prison have been subject to sexual assault previous to serving in prison, and we need to actually make sure that we take into account, the rights. Women should feel safe in prison. When they're saying that, you would never find me arguing anything other than women should feel safe when they're in prison.
OK, Austin, great to have you back on the show. Thanks for your time. We'll speak again. Former SNP Glasgow City Councillor Austin Sheridan. Very excited about my Mark Meets guest, a rather influential Tory MP, former speechwriter to David Cameron, former top aide to Boris Johnson, plus my take at 10. I'll be talking about the NHS. How do we fix it? Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB Plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10 in just a moment, big changes and efficiencies planned for the NHS. About bloody time. My Mark Meets guest is Conservative MP Danny Krueger, former Boris Johnson aide, chief speechwriter for David Cameron, a key player in the Tory party, and his mum is Prue Leith from the Bake Off. I'm sure he had a delicious childhood. He'll be telling us his story next. In the news agenda with my panel, do we demonise dieting? And is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner, or is it charming? Plus tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp. You can set your watch to it. Lots to get through, including my Take at 10 monologue on the NHS, my prescription for a better service after the headlines with the ever-healthy Ray Addison.
Not sure where you got that from, Mark. Good evening. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Labour Party says Rishi Sunak still has questions to answer following his sacking of Nadeem Zahawi. The Prime Minister made the decision after an ethics inquiry found that the party chairman had committed a serious breach of the ministerial code. Mr Zahawi has been facing questions over his tax affairs after he admitted that he had to pay a penalty to HMRC for an error. Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, says she's written to Rishi Sunak.
What did he know and when about that enormous settlement that Nadeem Zahawi was negotiating with HMRC and the huge penalty that he had to pay? Why did Rishi Sunak say in Parliament that all questions had been answered about this affair? And why on earth is the Prime Minister holding up this rogues gallery of Conservative ministers with others who obviously have broken security rules, who are subject to allegations of very serious bullying, and yet the Prime Minister seems too weak to act against them?
No newly convicted transgender person with a history of violence against women will be placed in female prisons in Scotland. The temporary measures aim to ensure that the safety of inmates while the management of trans prisoners is examined. The decision comes ahead of an urgent review into lessons learned by the case of convicted rapist Isla Bryson, who was originally sent to a women's prison. A 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a teenage girl in Hexham. 15-year-old Holly Newton was stabbed in the Priest Popple area of the town on Friday, and she died in hospital. A 16-year-old boy was also injured in the attack. The accused, who can't be named for legal reasons, has also been charged with attempted murder and possession of an offensive weapon. The government will publish an urgent emergency care plan tomorrow to try to tackle pressures on the NHS. It comes as the Health Department announced plans to build virtual beds, caring for tens of thousands of elderly and vulnerable people in their own homes. The Health Secretary says shifting care away from hospitals will reduce waiting times. However, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is accusing the government of sticking plaster politics.
It seems we've gone from 40 new hospitals to hospitals at home. I think a lot of people will say, well, how will I be able to be treated in my own home if the government's half the number of district nurses who are essential to provide support in the community? I think this is a government that's run out of steam, run out of ideas, and isn't able to deal with the fundamental problems of the NHS, and so they're resorting to sticking plasters.
And members of Britain's Hindu and Indian communities have been protesting at BBC buildings across the country over a documentary on Narendra Modi. People gathered in London, Newcastle and Birmingham in response to the programme, which examines claims over the Indian Prime Minister's role in riots in 2002, in which thousands of Muslims died. The protesters are calling for a boycott of the BBC and for it to be defunded. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back now to Mark.
My thanks to Ray Addison, who returns at 11. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. It's just gone 10 o'clock. In my take at 10 in a moment, big changes and efficiencies planned for the NHS, as Ray mentioned in his bulletin. About bloody time. More on that shortly. My Mark Meets guest is Conservative MP Danny Krueger, MBE, former Boris Johnson aide and chief speechwriter for David Cameron. In the news agenda with my panel, do we demonise dieting? And is it old-fashioned for the man to pay, or is it just good manners? Plus, we've got tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. Tonight, joining me in the studio, former MEP Annunciata Rees-Mogg, TV and radio presenter Neil Fox, and journalist and political commentator Emma Burnell. A very busy hour to come, including those papers at 10:30 and my Mark Meets guest, top Tory MP Danny Krueger. But first, my take at 10. Alongside the economy and illegal immigration, surely this government's other great priority is the NHS. It's a scandal that over 7 million people are on a waiting list for treatment. What's that? Almost 1 in 10 of the population. We know the issues, the pandemic, and, as I've mentioned before, dreadful levels of public health in this country. So, for example, obesity and other lifestyle-related illnesses are bringing the service to its knees, threatening to ultimately bankrupt it. But the prescription is clear. An unprecedented focus on public health through education, encourage the public, starting with kids at school, to adopt a healthy diet, maybe teach kids how to cook at school. And the NHS can be liberated from what it currently does, which is essentially to facilitate and underwrite our unhealthy lifestyles. In its management of COVID, the NHS was clearly trying to save lives, and they feared becoming overwhelmed. I understand. But in my view, it was a disastrous policy in which so much focus on one disease came at the expense of more serious illnesses like cancer, mental health, type 2 diabetes and dementia. With excess deaths in early January of this year, the highest since February 2021 at the height of the pandemic, it doesn't speak well for the government's lockdown policy or even the vaccine rollout, after both of which you would expect excess deaths to be below, not above average. Wasn't that the point? So the NHS must change or die, which is why I'm pleased to see that at last we're having a grown-up national conversation about the service. It's very clear that the nurses and doctors, the hospital porters, the cooks, the security guards, you name it, they are the best we have. We love them. And the doctors and nurses have been through hell during the pandemic. But at a cost of £13,000 per household, the NHS's problems are no longer about cash. Most of the public accept this money pit can no longer be filled, and change is the answer. Notwithstanding a government injection of more billions over the next 2 years to catch up from the pandemic, this money will rightly be combined with real reform and fresh ideas. For example, as reported in today's Sunday Telegraph, the idea of opening more so-called virtual wards so the frail and elderly can be monitored at home by doctors using video and other technology. Now, don't worry, they won't be stuck at home with an iPad or an iPhone. They may not have one. Importantly, this will work with the backup of community teams visiting people in their homes, taking pressure off hospitals and improving patient care. So there you go. The doctor will see you now, at home. What's not to like? We can debate the rights and wrongs of these ideas, but it's clear the system we have at the moment is not working. Drastic changes are needed to save the patient. I think we should start by scrapping diversity officers and middle managers on six-figure salaries. The NHS needs to be leaner, meaner, and yes, smaller. It's often proudly said that the NHS is the biggest employer in Europe. Apparently, the third biggest employer in the world. Why is that a boast? That is a shameful admission of its wild inefficiency. Be clear, I don't want to see the NHS privatised, and I do not want an American system in which you have to reach for your credit card when you break your leg. Absolutely not. But it's good that we're having a conversation about how private enterprise can be deployed to save costs and to deliver a better service for patients. Even Labour are saying that now. It's good that we're having a conversation about possibly charging for GP appointments, which could potentially prevent missed appointments and stop so many people taking our so-called free health service for granted. Maybe it's a bad policy, maybe it's a good one, but let's talk about it, let's debate it. A day of reckoning is coming for our health service if it is to survive. The NHS is no longer a political sacred cow. Yes, the staff are utterly brilliant, but its middle managers are full of bull. The health service has been milking us for too long, and given the NHS has presided over decades of declining public health, I've got beef with it. The stakes are high, so they must take stock and go hell for leather. If we don't embrace change, we risk déjà vu. The NHS sacred cow has become a mad cow, but it's too soon for the slaughterhouse just yet. What's your prescription for the NHS? Mark at gbnews.uk. What do you think about the idea of virtual wards? The idea is to save money and take pressure off hospitals. I think we should look at it. I think we've actually got to do some big thinking about the NHS. Let's get the views of my all-star panel, former MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg, TV and radio presenter Neil Fox, and journalist and political commentator Emma Burnell. Let's ask you about this, Emma Burnell. The NHS, it's not about money anymore, is it? It's got to change to survive.
I think it's a little bit of both. It was underfunded for a very long time. And while funding has returned back to the average as it was, for 10 years it didn't have that, and that
I mean, Emma, I don't want to interrupt you because you know that's not my style, but for example, the NHS was protected during austerity. It was ring-fenced.
It was
and
ring-fenced,
of course, more money was pumped in during the pandemic.
Costs went up. The spending as a percentage went down during that time, and then it went back up during COVID. So we had 10 years where it was going down, then we had time when it went back up. But there is also a conversation to be had about the different type of society we have now from when the NHS was set up, and how we can develop a healthcare system that is about positive health. I agree with you that much more public health preventative measures would make so much more difference. Part of the problem is always that we always say we want to see preventative health. The corollary of much more preventative health would be fewer hospitals. And we all go, that would be great in theory. Then you have an MP whose local hospital might want to be closed down. Not such a happy bunny. So we need to be able to manage this as a whole system in a way that brings the staff, the patients, the politicians and the taxpayers together rather than always seen as in opposition to each other, and actually develops a system that works, that keeps us healthier but also happier. And I think that's not beyond the wit of man, but at the moment, too often this becomes just a cudgel for us all to fight each other with.
Annunziata, your prescription for the NHS?
I think it needs to change or it will die, as many people very sadly do, that it's somehow got itself upside down, that we don't put enough emphasis on primary care so that people end up in hospital, in A&E, suffering from much worse conditions than had they been spotted or treated in a more minor way much earlier on. And I think we've really got to rethink where the focus is, whether it's from the care side and making sure that people don't have those terrible falls that need massive hip replacements, etc., that they are in a safe environment, that perhaps some of this online digital idea is going to work. I am no expert. I think it's got to be a beginning to make sure people get the care early, so that it doesn't lead to the very major problems later on. And that's true of virtually all the diseases. The NHS is renowned worldwide, but not in the way the British think it is. Its outcomes are not up there with our European neighbours.
Neil Fox.
Yeah, I mean, people are justifiably proud of the NHS and having this, free healthcare system. And I think we want to do that and make sure that it's really efficient. And the problem is it's obviously just become very efficient. And now what we really need is to work out, why has it become inefficient? Is it because there's too much middle management? I hear a lot. I've never worked in the NHS, so, I'm just really spurting what other people have said. But we need to work out why it's inefficient, because if you have private healthcare in this country, and maybe we need to get Bupa, Aviva and all the other companies to try and help look at this problem. They run them as businesses and they're efficient. They make sure they don't waste the money. They may make sure they would centrally buy resources so that penicillin or say, paracetamol costs £2 a pack, not 10 quid a pack. We hear all these crazy stories coming out. So things like that are really obvious that need sorting out. But also what we need to do is we do need to modernise and make sure people don't miss appointments or waste time with their local doctors. Our local healthcare centre, which was brilliant during lockdown, I have to say, they did an awful lot of stuff virtually, and they said they got through 10 times as many patients. It was super efficient. And the vast majority didn't need to go in, and they could get the advice they needed potentially online. Not so good maybe for a very elderly set of clients or patients, but I guess with a younger generation who are growing up with tech, everyone getting better at that. Also, your local chemists, they know an awful lot. They also have been to medical school, using their wisdom wisely, so people don't automatically go to the health centre or the hospital. There seems to be an awful lot that can be done. I'm really glad that people are talking about it now, not as like a political hot potato, but just as something we need to talk about. And the conversation has started. Let's hope we get a really sensible solution to save it, to make it efficient.
Annunziata, the clock's against us, so you want to jump in there?
My GP was also fantastic in lockdown, but one of the really worrying things that they told me was that so many people come for appointments because they feel lost, because they are lonely. There is very little outreach in our communities.
Yeah.
And those are the people that need the help most, but also do take up valuable time. That doesn't mean they don't need to be seen.
And I think that's a brilliant point, and what you want is those people getting that support and not turning up at their local hospital because they don't have an alternative. Fascinating points. What's your prescription for the NHS? Mark at gbnews.uk. Well, next up, former chief speechwriter to David Cameron, former top aide to Boris Johnson. What does Danny Krueger MP make of Rishi Sunak? Can he make Brexit a success? Can he win the next election? He'll answer those questions next.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What's your prescription for the NHS? A quick one from Richard. The NHS cannot be allowed to raid our taxes anymore. We must confront the elephant in the room and agree it's a dinosaur of grotesque inefficiency that needs streamlining and partial privatisation. And I got a similar email in relation to the German system from Andrew. I'll get to more of your feedback shortly, but it's time now for this. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, sport, showbiz and beyond. Tonight, the Conservative MP Danny Krueger, who represents the historic market town of Devizes. I knew I'd struggle with that. Devizes in Wiltshire, and I've been practising it all day. He first made his name in the party behind the scenes as speechwriter to David Cameron before becoming political secretary to the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. That was, of course, in the run-up to 2019. He voted Leave in 2016, sees Brexit as an opportunity and believes our best days lie ahead. Danny Krueger, MBE, welcome to GB News.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Good to be with you.
It's great to have you on the programme, and thank you for joining us at the 11th hour. Danny, what made you a Conservative in the first place?
Good question. I was always a Conservative. I was a different sort of Conservative when I was younger. I was a Thatcherite, small state libertarian. Then I read Edmund Burke at university and realised there's more to life than, the pursuit of self-interest and the invisible hand of the market, important as those things are. And I became a communitarian and a believer in tradition and in the inheritance of our country. So, I grew up as the child of entrepreneurs and obviously had a prosperous, stable upbringing. My parents were immigrants to this country from South Africa, so I've got a sense of loving this country, as it were, from the outside, even though I was born here. So I've got a mix of impulses, I guess, but I'm just an instinctive Tory. I know in my guts that it's right.
But you were the recipient of an MBE, upon which I congratulate you for your work in the community. Incredible work. For over a decade, you founded Only Connect, a project working in prisons to stop criminals reoffending. Danny, is the prison system working? And if not, how do we fix it?
It's not working. It's absolutely terrible. I'm afraid it's a sad indictment of many generations of worthy efforts to reform it. We send too many of the wrong people to prison. We don't catch enough criminals, obviously. We have a chronic crime problem. We have a chronic reoffending problem. So the prison system is not fixing the criminals that we send in there. And it's no surprise because they spend 23 hours a day lying on their backs, watching TV and dealing drugs to each other. So, the system is, I'm afraid to say, letting down both the general public and the potential victims of crime because it's letting down the criminals themselves who urgently need reform. And it is possible to reform most people. And we should be much more ambitious about what we can do with the prison system and with the justice system as a whole. I'm not sure that we should be sending everyone we do send to prison while we also need to be catching the serious criminals and putting them away for longer.
You worked closely, Danny, with Boris Johnson leading up to his landslide election victory in 2019. Was it a mistake to evict him from power?
Well, I think he evicted himself in the end, and I deeply regret it happened. As you say, I only worked with him up until the election, and I saw what he's capable of when we needed him, in those months when we were in a stalemate in Parliament and there was no prospect of breaking the logjam except by his courage and determination to do it. And he followed a really good plan. I will always honour him for that. But I'm afraid I think by the end, when it came to it, the support in the party had just fallen away and he hadn't done enough to shore it up. And obviously COVID, we can all blame COVID and rightly that was the undoing of him. But I'm afraid, it was inevitable by last summer, yeah.
I've got no doubt that Rishi Sunak enjoys your fulsome support. I think that shares in Rishi Sunak are too low. That's the theme of my Big Opinion monologue, which people can watch on Twitter at GB News. However, notwithstanding your doubtless support for our new Prime Minister, what does he need to do better?
He needs to reassemble the coalition that swept us to power in 2019. We have lost millions of voters back to Labour, to fringe parties on our right, and worst of all, to apathy and indifference and disillusionment. And Boris's achievement in 2019 was to mobilise people who believed in our country, believed in the potential of Brexit and of conservatism. And they spanned the whole nation. And we brought in voters who never voted for us before, as well as mobilising our own base. So that's the challenge. And we're not doing it sufficiently at the moment. We can all understand what happened last year, which led to Rishi coming in with a very, very difficult political situation. He hasn't yet been able turn the polls, but it's early days, and he's doing the primary job that he came in to do, which he had to do, which is to stabilise our position as a nation economically and to stabilise our position politically as a party and as a government. The challenge now, over the next 18 months until the election, is to be more radical, more authentically conservative, but in a way that genuinely connects with those floating voters who might or might not vote for us. And that isn't easy, but I think there is a route to it. And it's about reconnecting with that 2019 coalition. So it's being much more successful and tough and getting it right on the small boats and on immigration. I think that means leaving the ECHR. I don't think we're ever going to fix the small boats problem without that. There's economic reforms that need to take place, which we could discuss. But the other thing I would mention, and I think is crucial to our appeal, and it wasn't something that Boris made much of, but I think is really crucial, it's investing properly in families, making families feel that the government's on their side, making the tax system work for families with children and with dependent adults, with older parents who need support. There's a whole set of reforms I think about that being really authentically pro-family, as well as supporting the community life that we all depend on locally and that is so crucial to people's sense of identity and their sense of security. So investment in families, in communities, and getting the national story right, particularly around immigration, I think that's the path to victory for us.
You've had an amazing career, former chief leader writer, opinion columnist for the Telegraph newspaper, also great charity work. I mentioned that prison organisation, and also you've done work with the youth, with young people and children. And of course, you were chief speechwriter for David Cameron, who I would humbly suggest is a very underrated Prime Minister in what was an underrated government, the coalition government, who inherited an economic crisis but very much steadied the ship with the Lib Dems over 5 years. On a future occasion, we'll have to have that conversation. Before we let you go, because we've got the papers coming in and we need to get to those shortly, a quick word on your rather talented mum. She's nearly as famous as you, Danny. The entrepreneur, restaurateur and cook, star of Bake Off, Prue Leith. Just one question. I'm assuming you had a delicious childhood.
Yes, I had that question before, Mark, and I always answer yes, I certainly did. The good thing, though, my father was very traditional in his taste, so we didn't get any fancy food growing up, and so I've inherited that. And I like, bangs and mash, and my mum does that pretty well. So yeah, I ate well as a child. Yeah.
Listen, I'm sure she's very proud of you. You've done an awful lot, and I'm sure that there's a lot more to come. So thanks very much for joining us and telling us your story, Danny Krueger, MP. Fascinating conversation, I think you'll agree. We've got the papers next with full panel reactions. See you in 2.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's just gone 10:30. It's time for tomorrow's papers. Don't forget, in the news agenda with my panel, do we demonise dieting and is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner? But first, let's do this. Yes, indeed, we've got Monday's papers hot off the press with full panel reaction. Let's have a look at the Daily Express, and they lead with the following. Boris, Putin told me I could kill you in a minute. Boris Johnson has revealed that Vladimir Putin made an astonishing and chilling threat to him in a phone call. I don't want to hurt you, but with a missile, it would only take 1 minute. A pretty explosive headline and an explosive story. OK, let's go to the Mail now. Putin's threat to kill Boris. I don't want to hurt you, but with a missile, it would take 60 seconds. That story, once again, is going to dominate quite a few headlines, I've got no doubt, and gives you a flavour of just how Vladimir Putin conducts himself and what we're up against. By the way, we also have a very sad front-page story in relation to broadcasting legend Esther Rantzen. I'm fighting lung cancer, but I'm still optimistic. If you want to just come to me for a second, Sam, because I would like to say that Esther Rantzen has been on this programme several times. She's the ultimate professional. When she's on, you wouldn't believe she's 82. She's so articulate. She's still an amazing broadcaster. When I was growing up, I had 3 broadcasting heroes, and they were Terry Wogan, Cilla Black, and Esther Rantzen, and she rightly sits on that list of TV greats, and we wish her a speedy recovery and can't wait to have Esther back on the show soon. Let's have a look at the I paper next. And what they lead with is Sunak, and of course that was the topic of my big opinion monologue. Sunak's allies blame Johnson for Tory sleaze after the PM sacks Zahawi. MPs say legacy of Boris Johnson's time in power encouraged Tory chairman to try to cling on and is preventing Rishi Sunak from being able to appeal to voters. Oh, it seems like it's the Blame Boris campaign. OK, The Independent next. What took you so long, Rishi? PM finally fires Zahawi 6 months after we exposed the scandal. That's The Independent. 7 ministerial code breaches include untrue claims about The Independent. He lashes out at media but fails to apologise. I've got to say, great journalism by The Independent, who in the end got their man. The Mirror now. Tories engulfed by sleaze. Rotten to the core, Sunak finally sacks Zahawi over tax scandal, but dithering leader under fire. The Metro. Shamed Zahawi sacked, but he's nad sorry at all. Tory chairman acts for serious breach of ministerial rules, but blames the press. Also in the Metro, we're such bloomin' good pals. Katy Perry, of course, pop singer, her night out with fiancé Orlando and his ex. #awkward. Daily Star now for some proper journalism. Pammy the librarian. Can't judge a Baywatch pin-up gal by her cover. Red-hot Pamela Anderson wanted to be a librarian, but lost interest after being asked to appear in a men's mag. As you do. OK, let's have a look at the Telegraph. PM sacked Zahawi without a fair hearing. Allies of Tory chairman say Sunak rushed to remove him for political expediency. NHS ordered to reveal true A&E wait times. And Putin's threat to kill Johnson, that story appearing in the Telegraph as well. And last but not least, the Times. It's Zahawi axed as Sunak gets tough on standards. Rishi Sunak will take a zero-tolerance approach to future breaches of the ministerial code after sacking Nadeem Zahawi for failing to be honest about his tax affairs, according to senior allies. Also, millions will miss school in biggest strikes for a decade. Families face disruption on Wednesday as striking teachers force up to 4.5 million pupils to stay away from school on the biggest day of industrial action for a decade. Those are your front pages. Reacting to that, my all-star panel, we have former MEP, Brexit Party MEP Annunciata Rees-Mogg, television and radio presenter Neil Fox, and playwright and political commentator Emma Burnell. Shall we have a quick look at the striking teachers story? After 2.5 years of lockdowns and doing lessons on Zoom, this is the last thing young people and children need, isn't it, Emma?
It's a very, very upsetting situation for everyone. I know a lot of teachers. You'd expect that, wouldn't you? Lefty, North London dwelling liberal like me.
Well, I love a good teacher. I've got relatives in that game. And of course, I've got kids who spend occasional moments with teachers. Yeah.
But they are feeling desperate. They are exhausted. Genuinely. Not just that kind of exhaustion you get at the end of the day, but that kind of exhaustion you get at the end of, 5 years. They are just feeling so run down, so ground down. They're losing so many colleagues who are not being replaced. So people are doing more and more and more for what feels like, because of inflation, less and less and less, and it just can't go on. Yeah. So, yes, of course. I mean, I don't know a single teacher who gets into it because of the money. They go into it because they care about these kids, but they've also got to be able to look after themselves and live a healthy, sustainable life. And at the moment, too many of them are feeling that they just can't do that, and that's why they've reached the end of their tether.
Well, my view, Annunciata, is that no industrial action by NHS staff should affect patients, but it clearly has and will. No industrial action by teaching staff should affect pupils, but it will. And there's the rub.
Industrial action inevitably affects the people using the service, and children in this country don't have a choice but to use our education service. And I don't yet know, because teachers don't have to tell head teachers whether they're striking or not, whether my children will be at school on Wednesday or not. It's also the same day as a train strike. I think teachers have to do so much in the way that's not teaching. And that is one of the problems.
Social workers, police officers.
Absolutely.
They've got to feed the kids when they come in, often breakfast clubs.
Yeah, breakfast clubs, after-school clubs. That there's so much wraparound that isn't actually teaching responsibility, and that has put too great a burden on an awful lot of our teachers, and they have an absolute right
but is
to
money the
demonstrate
answer, or
that,
changing their role the answer?
I think teachers should be.
But strikes aren't just about money. Strikes are more often as much about terms and conditions as they are about money. So I do think it's important to make that case.
Would that wash with the unions, though, if they said, fine, we'll change the terms and conditions, but because of inflation, there will be no pay rise?
Well, there has to be some pay rise, because everyone is...
Inflation busting?
Have you tried to buy butter recently? It's insane!
I know, I hear you. Beyond the 5% that's been offered, given the fact that we've got a national debt of £2.1 trillion?
I mean, it is a balance of both, and any deal will be about negotiating a balance of both. But you do have to negotiate that, and you have to go in good faith and negotiate it properly.
And I think what must have been very hard, and we've discussed this before in this programme, that during COVID, for example, magic money, trillions, seem to be just thrown at a problem. Like, we'll just print money and we'll just buy whatever we need. And post-COVID, suddenly the money's all dried up. And I think people are probably thinking, well, hang on. We have been going through years now of where we haven't been getting the proper pay rises. And can't we have one now? We've got to force the issue. I mean, this is a much wider... Like the NHS is going to be reformed. I think the education system, they are talking about it now, needs reforming. The obsession with exams, the obsession with how young our kids necessarily maybe go to school, and everything you were saying about breakfast clubs. And teachers are often funding these breakfast clubs themselves. It's not just for charity now or local councils or authorities. They're often putting their hands in their own pockets because they see these kids coming in, so many many now. Now, whether that's a family breakdown, why their parents aren't potentially feeding them before they go off to school, I do not know. But it's obviously a much wider issue. But it's something these teachers are definitely having to deal with. We did a lot of stuff with breakfast clubs, and I was amazed that something like 1 in 4 kids in London, for example, actually go to a breakfast club, and I was quite staggered at that statistic. So all of that, and being police and health social workers.
Teachers can't teach hungry kids.
No, they can't.
Because they will not sit in a classroom
They won't.
and be educated because they can't. They physically can't.
Yep.
Well, I have a personal anecdote of a family friend who's a primary school teacher who was moved to tears when they opened a school lunchbox and found a Kit Kat and a can of Red Bull. And this is obviously probably a rare occurrence, but indicative of what teachers often face.
Yep.
Let's have a look at the Times Annunciata. Zahawi axed as Sunak gets tough on standards. Are we seeing a different side to the Prime Minister now? And has he fixed and solved a problem by firing him?
It's very easy to argue this both ways, that he did follow due process, that he had said he would, and at the end of it, it would seem that the very final moments were slightly rushed through, but he got the conclusions and acted very, very quickly. Now, that all seems fair enough, but has he set a precedent for what happens if anyone else breaks the ministerial code in any way?
Indeed, but wasn't that the weak spot of Boris Johnson, that he couldn't fire people? For example, he didn't fire Matt Hancock after the CCTV camera sex scenes that we all enjoyed. He didn't fire Dominic Cummings for the ridiculous pantomime in the Rose Garden of Number 10. This was a Prime Minister that suffered great political damage from not firing people.
He did, but you can suffer damage from both. And if you alienate people by firing them too hastily, you can lose that wing of support. And if you let people hang around and cause more trouble, you lose different wing of support. And I think actually on this one, Sunak has probably trodden the right course to have a process and to follow the conclusion.
We were talking about nicknames last night, Neil. I'm just wondering whether we now have Ruthless Rishi.
I don't think Ruthless Rishi. You mentioned earlier on, it was a case of kind of the innocent until proven guilty. OK, and so they've done the due process, they've worked out, and then, OK, he has broken the code, he needs to go, and then he's acted pretty swiftly, very swiftly, and he has gone. It's now left another problem, of course. It's the blame game going on now as to, you know, whose fault is all this.
But doesn't it feel like a contrast to Boris Johnson's administration? Doesn't it feel decisive? It's been nipped in the bud.
Well, it does. At the very top of the show, we were talking about that in your 100 days of the first 100 days, nothing's been particularly crazy or loud, or it's just been a bit stable. And that's, in a way, what I think we need as a nation. Bit of boring's not bad every now and again. It shouldn't be a giant soap opera every day, because it's become a bit like that, politics. And actually, when I was a kid growing up, it was just a bit dull. But they got on with the job, hopefully. And that's all we really care about. Are they good at their job? Because I don't need him to be funny, brilliant, or come and have a pint with me. Just do your job well. And all of them do their job well.
I tend to agree. That was the theme of my monologue, is he doesn't have to be a great guy. He has to be a great Prime Minister. The issue is, Emma, for Labour supporters, that Sunak has acted decisively, he's solved a political problem, and now he can move on.
He's had 100 days in office. This story has been rumbling on for at least 14 of them. That's quite a big percentage of those 100 days that he's been dealing with this personnel problem. If he had suspended Zahawi during the investigation, that would have been decisive. This was not decisive. 2 PMQs ago, he was saying nothing to see here. A week later, he's saying, I might set up an inquiry. A week after that, he's sacking it. It's not decisive. And I think you're doing a lovely job at trying to tell yourself that it is. But you know it's not, Mark. You're not an idiot.
Well, what I did say on yesterday's show is I think Zahawi should have stepped aside when this emerged.
Yeah.
Because
he should have been made to step aside if he were.
Because he's a good guy. I've interviewed him on the show. But he should have done that, because if there was no case to answer and he was cleared of any wrongdoing, he could make a glorious political comeback, which I'm sure he would have.
But I think if you look at these 3 different front pages, you've got the I saying Sunak allies blame Johnson for Tory sleaze. You've got Daily Telegraph, PM sacked Zahawi without a fair hearing. And then you've got the Times saying Zahawi acts as Sunak gets tough on standards. There is not a coherent narrative that is being set on this.
Interesting.
That is a real problem.
OK, we'll get to more big stories from the papers next, including, do we demonise dieting? Is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner? And that story in the Sun newspaper, Orlando Bloom still in touch with his ex. How does the wife feel about that one? We'll discuss that next.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Older people,
welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight. Listen, I'm very excited. I'm looking after the Mark Stein slot this week from 8, I'm going to work this out, 8 till 9. 8 till 9, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday of this week. So do join me in them. I will be the warm-up for Dan Wootton, that is myself, this week from 8 till 9. And, of course, Mark Dolan tonight returns on Friday in the company of Neil Fox, no less. Come on.
Come on.
I tell you what. It's going to be the best. I'll be watching. Now, let's get to more stories from the papers and a couple of interesting ones floating around. And let's have a look at this in particular. A parent of 2 has revealed that she's keeping her diet a secret from her kids as she doesn't want to pass on her lifelong body insecurities to them. The mother has announced she's the largest and heaviest she's ever been as she swaps pizza for salad. With the rise of eating disorders and obesity, she wants to be considerate and careful with the language used around dieting and send the right message to her kids. So it begs the question, do we demonise dieting? Neil?
Well, we shouldn't demonise dieting, but I think what we have to do is try and understand why potentially we or people are overweight, and we need to actually focus not on body shape necessarily, but on health. Health, fitness, and eating properly. And that's got to start at home, and it's got to start in the school as well.
But my team were talking about it earlier in the show, and they were saying that quite often, if you go on a diet, people try to talk you out of it, you know. So it's like, oh, go on, you could have this cake, and it's like that peer pressure.
Well, there was that thing
and then there's
about-
other thing where people go on the keto diet, which is very popular.
Yeah.
And people say, oh no, you can't do that. That'll kill you. That's really unhealthy.
Well, there was this report
It seems
came out
everyone's got
saying
an
if you
opinion.
take cake to work, you know, now you can't do that anymore because you're, in a way, helping people get fatter and more unhealthy. You mustn't do that anymore. Look, these things all come down to balance. It seems that it's all got a bit unbalanced at the moment. You know, I need to lose a few pounds. I've told my kids I'm really going to try and lose a few pounds. I don't think it's bad to tell my kids I'm trying to do that. They're all very healthy. And you kind of go, OK, Dad, you need to lose a few pounds. And actually, if they were to say, Dad, don't eat a third slice of pizza, you have to sort of go, well, I shouldn't. But demonising, I think, would be crazy. I think we just have to be sensible and have a conversation that is about health and not all of... And the problem with social media is people are paranoid about what they look like all the time.
You're
Kids
so right.
particularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is also, Emma, is that I think sometimes when people go on diets, they don't feel very supported.
I mean, I obviously have very complex feelings around this. I used to be 25.5 stone. I've put on a bit of weight over Christmas. I'm trying to lose it again, but I have
That's an incredible achievement. You look
half
amazing.
of my body weight.
It's unbelievable.
Partly, I had some surgery to give me a head start.
Yeah.
I know other people who've had the same surgery. It didn't work for them because you do have to use it as a head start. It's not a magic bullet. It is very, very complex to diet and socialise sometimes. My friends are so bored with going to Nando's, but I know what I can eat in Nando's.
Yeah.
It's just,
you stick to the protein, right?
I stick, yeah.
No wraps.
Exactly.
Give me the chicken.
So, yeah, you have to find a balance. Neil's absolutely right. I think we need to grow up around our relationship with food and our relationship with eating. And we also need to be much more understanding about the link between eating and mental health. And that's clearly what happened with me and my body. And I disassociated far too much with and got into a very, very nasty spiral of I'm unhappy because I'm fat because I'm unhappy, I'm happy so I'm going to eat, blah, 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 blah.
And food as a drug. Food becomes a drug.
Food absolutely is a drug. And the thing about food as a drug is you 100% can't go cold turkey. Yeah, it's like asking an alcoholic to drink a little bit of wine every day.
Yeah.
You just can't. That's not how it works. So you have to really... So I will give you a secret of the show. I was chatting with one of the lovely producers earlier, and she was like, do you want a car home at the end? And I'm like, no. I want to take the tube home so that I do the 25-minute walk from the tube station and make sure that every single day I'm building in exercise, I'm thinking about what I'm eating. And it's just about trying to make... And you can tell, because you've just done a full body shot of me, I need to lose more.
No, you're gorgeous.
But I do have a completely different relationship to my body now, and I am healthier and happier, and those two things do work in tandem.
I think it's amazing what you've achieved, and you're an inspiration to all of us, let me tell you. A quick word. A woman has taken to the forum website Mumsnet to share her financial dating dilemma. She currently earns 4 times more than her boyfriend and pays for everything in the relationship, and admitted it's starting to give her the ick. For those that aren't down with the kids, that means it's a turn-off. Mrs. Dolan knows about the ick. So it begs the question, is it old-fashioned for the man to pay for dinner? Annunciata.
I am quite old-fashioned, and actually I think old-fashioned manners are extremely appealing. I'd been probably not married to him if my husband had never taken me to dinner in the first place.
Especially the first one.
Exactly. And after that, we would split things, whoever was in the position to treat the other one, and we still do, whether it's a birthday or an anniversary or whatever. But once you're in a family, I think you all have to pull in and share the burden, whether that's financial, emotional, physical, whatever. You're all pulling together as a team, and it's not him or me, it's us.
Well, I would like to buy all of you dinner tonight because you've been the most amazing panel. So thank you so much. Do come back again soon. Don't forget, Neil Fox is in the hot seat looking after Mark Dolan tonight, next Friday and Saturday. And I'll be doing 8 till 9, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday of this week. So I'll see you tomorrow at 8. And don't forget that Headliners is next. Of course, top comedians reviewing tomorrow's papers. Thanks to my brilliant team for working so hard. Holly and the gang, couldn't do it without you. I'll see you tomorrow at 8.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.